again, Rebecca.
And Anna.
So the last time we saw you, we talked about who the Western honeybee is. We got to really know who it is we're working with and what it looks like inside a beehive.
That's right. We also talked about other pollinators that they may be working in tandem to pollinate the foods and the plants that we know and love. And this time around, we're going to get to know the worker bee a little bit more intimately. Who are they? What do they do? And
how are they each essential to the hive?
And we're also going to be taking in some lessons from the hive. What can we learn from them that we can then apply to our communities and organizations?
And we're going to talk about what it means to do something for the good of the hive, or what the good of the hive is, or what it means to do something for the good of our communities.
That's right. See you on the other side. Hey, Rebecca.
Hey.
Hey. So, you've heard about the worker bees, but I'm here to tell you a little bit more about them. So, you know that they make up about 90% of the hive, but what you don't know is that when we say worker bees, we're really talking about an array of roles. And when I say that, I mean that every single worker bee plays each of these roles throughout their lifetime. Now, queen bees live about 2 to 5 years. Drones live about 8 weeks, and worker bees live about 6. So when you see a worker bee out there flying around, pollinating flowers, what you're really seeing is an older bee on their last job. But let's work our way backwards. First, bees do things around the hive, closer to home. This means that they're nurse bees. Nurse bees take care of the babies, and they take care of the queen. This means keeping them warm, keeping them fed, making that sure that they have all of their needs met, right? The other bees that we can talk about too is the maintenance bees. Maintenance bees make sure that things are clean, make sure that the propolis is sealing all of the cracks, that they're sealing away all of the things that could be harmful for bees, to making sure that the hive itself is clean and healthy and a good place to thrive for everyone. The other bees that we can talk about are the architects, the engineers, the mathematicians, the builder bees of the hive. The builder bees are around 2 weeks old. This is when they develop their wax glands, and with their wax glands, they build honeycomb. That's right, the honey wax. The honeycomb where they do everything, where they live, where they put their food away, where they breed their babies, where they keep the honey. All of that is built by the bees from the little flakes of wax that come out of their bodies. The beautiful thing about that is that they're very intricate, much more intricate than you would think. Now, we are all very familiar with the hexagon shape, and what's beautiful about that is that every single hive all over the world pretty much uses the same measurements to create these things. So not only are we creating a hexagon, but we're creating a hexagon that is at a certain angle so that things don't spill out. Not only are we doing that, but we're making sure that it's the perfect length so that the queen can lay at the very back and center of the cell. Not only that, but in between each frame or each slice of comb, there's a specific measurement, and that's called the bee space. The bee space is just enough space for bees to move around, do their thing, and still be able to take care of whatever it is that is inside those cells on either side. Isn't that cool? Same measurements all over the world by these beautiful Western honeybees. But that's not all. The other thing that bees do throughout their lifetime is that they become guard bees. Now, guard bees, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? They're the ones who hang out at the mouth of the hive, and they're kind of the bouncers of the hive. They kind of say, okay, hey, you, who goes there? You're not coming in. They're protecting, and they're the first ones to come out to investigate. Like, who are you? What are you doing here? And what do you want with our hive? The type of worker bee that you're most familiar with is the forager. They're the ones that you see out there pollinating, flying around, posing on flowers, putting on pollen pans, all of it. They're, I guess, the most visible, and they're pretty much on their last leg as far as their lifetime goes, which is a beautiful thing. You're getting to see a bee that has worked every job in the hive, and that is now out there living its best life, bringing you food. That's right. Remember, we talked about pollinators, and remember we talked about bees in particular being a really important pollinator when it comes to our agricultural system. Pollinators in general are responsible for pollinating about 75 to 80% of the things that we eat. Bees in particular are really important to crops like peppers, citrus, cotton even, and almonds is a really big one. What happens is that beekeepers from around the country transport their hundreds of beehives over to the almond orchards in California mostly. They're placed smack dab in the middle of almond orchards. So while they're there, they get to work. They are drinking the almond nectar, and as they're drinking their almond nectar, they're picking up pollen. And every time that they go to a different flower, they're picking up and dropping off pollen. That's how things get pollinated, which is a beautiful thing. But imagine now being a bee and drinking just one kind of nectar for months at a time. Doesn't sound very tasty to me, and it's probably not the most sustainable way of going about things. Now, we've talked about other pollinators, native pollinators in particular, and the way that we've built our agricultural system around this one western honeybee, the way that we have brought them in by the truckload in order to support and sustain our current system, it's no wonder everyone is so very worried about what would happen if these populations continue to collapse. It would be very devastating. And, you know, it's something to think about when we're planting the way that we're planting. It's not only bad for the bees to just be drinking one thing all the time, but also for the soil too. The monocrop way of growing food, meaning that there's just one crop planted for acres, miles and miles and miles, and it's just the one crop that is taking those specific nutrients from the soil for, you know, these are trees, so this is for many generations at a time. That's pretty harmful to our soil and depleting for it too. So think about that the next time you drink some almond milk or have a little Chex Mix or however it is that you enjoy your foods. Think about the ways that we could be diversifying our farmlands and planting things more sustainably, not just for the bees and for other pollinators, but for ourselves and for us to be able to sustain a world that is healthy and nurturing and nourishing for all of us. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is honey. What do you think all this nectar is for? Well, not only is it for honey, but it's also for bee bread, which I know Rebecca told you guys about. But honey itself is really just a concentrated version of nectar. What happens is actually really funny. Now, a forager bee will come back with their honey stomach, because honeys have two stomachs. They have a regular stomach, and then they have a honey stomach full of nectar. And when I say full, I really mean just like a really tiny little bit. But every little bit adds up. Now, when they get to the front of the hive, they'll drop off the little bit of nectar, and someone else will pick it up and put it in their honey stomach. And then they'll do that again, and someone else will pick it up, and so on and so forth. And that will happen a couple dozen times until it is ready to go into a honey cell. And down at the very bottom, we have the very first bed of nectar. Now, those honey cells get filled up all the way to the top, and then someone comes along and fans it. Fans it to the point where all of the water gets dried up, and all we have left is honey. The way us beekeepers know that the honey is ready is when there's a wax capping right over the top, and it is all full and done. Now, as a beekeeper, organizer, community member, one thing that I really appreciate about all of the roles that I just talked about is the fact that every single one of the worker bees basically has a really intimate understanding of what it is to work a certain role. So imagine being able to have your family work that way, or your workplace, your organization. If everyone has a clear understanding of what it takes to really thrive in a particular role, imagine how much clearer and how much smoother everything would run, because then you could really communicate with each other with a really empathetic understanding of what the other has to juggle as they navigate any challenge or everyday life, really. One great thing to think about when we talk about communication is all of the different ways in which bees communicate with each other. It could be as simple as pheromones. When we get close, or when things seem a little bit iffy, they use this pheromone that kind of smells like bananas. And so that's how we know as beekeepers that they're warning each other, and that we need to be on the lookout and be more calm and slow with our movements, because they're on edge. Another way that bees communicate is through dance. Through dance, they do something really fun called the waggle dance, and it's basically like a figure 8 motion, which they do to tell each other where the really great source of nectar might be. So depending on the direction in which they're going, depending how many times they do the figure 8, that's how you know the distance, and whether it's east, northeast, and what the flowers look like even. So that's a really great way to think about, how the bees make collective decisions that are great, and even the best thing for the hive. One really great way in which bees communicate is when they swarm. Basically, they have to make the decision, like, okay, we're way too crowded in this space, and we think it's time, right? Do you agree? Do you agree? Do you agree? Do you agree? How that decision is made is basically pretty simple and similar to what the waggle dance looks like. First things first, scouts are sent out. Once the scouts are sent out into the world, they're, basically looking for an ideal situation for the thriving hive that they're a part of. they're getting ready to split the hive. Now, what's already in motion is that they're raising a new queen and that they're also raising drones to get ready to mate with that queen. All these things you've already learned about. But what you don't know and might not realize is that once the scouts find a place, they come back to the hive and they let everyone know exactly what they're thinking for their new home. So first they tell one bee, then 2, then 4, 8, 16, 32. What's next? Then the whole hive knows and everyone agrees. Some of them stay and some of them go. They're split into half. The new queen stays and the old queen goes to the new spot which they've all decided on would be a great new start. As beekeepers, Rebecca and I are constantly talking about all of the lessons that we're getting from the hive. I think collective decision making is a great one. It's also interesting to think about how language works. We would probably all assume that the queen is in charge and making all of these decisions for everyone and ordering people around, wearing a crown, and not really caring much about her constituents. But that's not the case at all. They're the ones who decide. This is a great lesson because we're almost, in many ways, always taught that it's every man for himself. Even that phrase is so very specific to one type of person. What if it's everyone for everyone and we could all just work together as a team with cooperation, with beautiful communication, as hard or as slow as that may seem? I think that in the end could get us to a more sustainable world. Another beautiful lesson from the hive is community care. I mean, think about it. All of those nurse bees taking care of the queen, making sure she's good. Imagine her. You know, I can kind of relate to the fact that she's pretty much permanently pregnant for the whole of her life. All 5 years pregnant and delivering babies, 2,000, up to 2,000 in a day. Imagine what that takes out of her as a queen that is dedicated to making sure that the hive thrives. If she didn't have those nurse bees taking care of her, that would be a very difficult thing, much more difficult than it already is. Think about the babies having the nurse bees right there by their side, counting day 1, day 2, day 3 of royal jelly for every single one of those eggs. That's a lot of eggs. Think about all of the ways in which they even keep each other warm. When it gets a little bit cold outside, the bees are inside regulating the temperature. They're waggling, wiggling, and making sure things stay warm. That's community care if I've ever seen it.
Wow, Anna, that was so cool to learn about all the different roles that the worker bees have, and the roles of all the bees. And really cool to kind of understand how every single bee is important and essential to the survival of the hive.
Wow, I'm so glad you said that because, you know, we're going through a particularly special time right now, and it makes me wonder, what would our worlds be like if we considered everyone to be essential? What would it be like if we treated them as such? What do you think?